Okay, so let's open the slides. Okay, so the title of the paper is Representation Learning with Contrastive Predictive Coding. So let's quickly jump into the main idea. So this paper is actually for learning representation of very high dimensional data through prediction of future observations in latent space. That means given a high dimensional data, and the target is to learn representation for that high dimensional signal, but decomposing that signals into multiple uh, samples, multiple observations in latent space, and then based on current context, it is trying to predict future samples in the latent space. We'll be clear with an intuitive figure that is in the next slide. If you have any questions, you can ask me. And the authors have used this idea of presenting high dimensional signals in different applications. For example, in speech recognition, in computer vision, in natural language processing, and in reinforcement learning. So this is a schematic idea of how this contrastive predictive coding idea can be used for speech representation. So as we see, given a speech signal, and there will be two components in this architecture. One will be encoder and another will be autoregressive model. So the idea is to encode each sample, and then based on current context, it will predict future samples in the latent space. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and how many samples it will predict based on the current context, it will depend on a particular setting. That means it may be that based on current context, it will predict just 2 future instances, or 4 future instances, or 5 or 6 or 7. And they have shown some experiments that how many samples it will be wise to predict for a particular setting. It is experimental and it is based on trial and error. Okay, so this idea is for computer vision, and for this they have taken a 256 by 256 image and then converted that image into 7 by 7 grids with 50% overlap, and each cell in the grid is an image patch of 64 by 64. Mm-hmm. And image patch will be encoded. Each image patch will be encoded, and based on the current context, see what is the context here. So for example, we have 7 by 7 grids, and CT is our current context. Current context is actually summary of the first 3 rows for this particular example. For the 3 rows constitute the current context, and the purpose is to predict the future patches based on this context. So for computer vision, the future patches will be the patches in the following rows, the top 5 rows. That
This is
means,
basically like image and painting kind of stuff.
yeah, right. So it will predict based on this city, it will predict this patch, this patch, this patch, this patch, and the next patch. That means top 5 image patches in the following rows. Does it make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So why they have not directly predict the future instance based on the current context? Because it is not, if just based on context, see if they predict what will be the next sample, it will not be useful to extract shared information. And that's why they have tried to predict multiple future samples based on the current context. And intuitively, it will help us to maximize mutual information between present and the future instances of the signal. And mutual information between the context and the current sample can be represented using this equation, but they didn't directly compute this mutual information in their experimental setting. Instead, they used a density ratio that will be proportional to the mutual information. So they have defined their density ratio like this and computed this density ratio using this transformation function. CT, where CT is the current context and GT plus K is the future kth instance in the latent space.
You mean K time steps in the future?
Yeah. K times ahead in the future, yeah.
Yep.
And Z is the future representation in the latent space. And for these, they have taken a series of samples, and only one of them is positive sample, and rest of them are negative samples. That means only one of them will be correct prediction for a particular future time step, and others will be negative samples for that particular time step. And they created, they have used noise contrastive loss estimation using this equation. This is basically categorical cross entropy loss. And please keep in mind that this numerator is actually the density ratio they wanted to estimate. So with this, they are actually trying to predict the only one positive samples in the given set of samples. And they have shown that predicting this positive sample is actually proportional to the density ratio that they wanted to estimate. Because this probability is actually proportional to this density ratio they wanted to estimate. And they have shown that with this noise contrastive estimation loss, they are actually increasing the upper bound, lower bound of the mutual information between the current context and the future sample. That is, if they decrease this loss, it means they are increasing the upper bound of the mutual information between current context and the future sample. Does it make sense? Harsh, any question?
I'm trying to think how this is written by decreasing the loss function. The loss is no contrastive loss, right?
Yes.
Increasing the decreasing the loss increases the lower bound. That makes sense actually, right? Because you're trying to maximize your information with respect to the positive sample.
Yes.
So when you're decreasing that,
Yes.
your mutual information between the positive sample and the
Yes.
context goes up. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. And for speech recognition, they have, and as we have seen earlier, that in our setting will be required basically two components. One of them is encoder, and another one is autoregressive model. So for speech recognition or speech representation, they have used strided convolutional neural network as encoder, and they have used 5 convolutional layers with different strides and filters with 511 hidden units and railway activations. And they have downsampled the input space into 10 milliseconds of space. That means for 10 milliseconds of space, they have got a feature factor. For every 10 millisecond of space, one feature factor will be generated. Is that clear?
For every 10 milliseconds, yep.
Yeah. And then as autoregressive models, they have used GRURNN with 256 dimensional hidden state. And the goal is to predict 12 time steps in the future based on the current context. Every time based on the current context is predicting 12 future time steps in the using the contrastive laws. But it can be varied over different experiments. It is not fixed that 12 timestamps is to be used. They have shown that using different time steps for prediction may result in different results. And they have shown these in their experimental results. We'll see. Okay, so after getting their model converged, they have used their CPC presentations for phone classification and also for speaker classifications. And they have tried to compare their CPC representation with 3 baselines. That means their model based on random initialization and MFCC representation of space signals, and also um, end-to-end supervised classification models using the same architecture. So as we can see on the left, that if they just randomly initialize their architecture, then the accuracy of phone classification is only 27.6. And also we should note that they have used their CPC representation not in this model, in this particular model. They have just extracted CPC representation out of this model, and they have tried to use that representation for logistic regression classifier, not here. So MFCC using logistic regression, they have got 39.7% accuracy. Using CPC extracted out of this architecture, and they have used these in logistic regression classifier and received 64.6% accuracy. And with supervised, they mean that the model they have used for CPC representation, they have actually trained it for supervised classification by training end to end, and they received 74.6% accuracy. But for speaker classification, as we can see that the CPC representation fed into logistic regression classifier gives almost same or similar accuracy as supervised model trained end to end. Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay. So on the right side, they have tried to show that how many future steps is good enough for getting good CPC representation. So here, first they have shown that they have just tried to predict 2 future steps and got 28.5% accuracy. And they have tried to predict 4 steps ahead and got 57% accuracy, and 80 steps ahead, 63.6% accuracy, and so on. And they have observed that predicting 12 future steps gave them maximum accuracy, and that's 64.6. And also they have tried to pick negative samples from different structures. That means mixed speaker, same speaker. Mixed speaker means they have tried to take negative samples from all of the different speakers, including the current one. Okay. Same speaker. Just they took samples from the same speakers. And mixed speakers. Mixed speakers means they are taking negative samples from all the different speakers except the current one.
Excluding them.
Mm-hmm. And same speaker excluding, it means they are taking all the negative samples from the same speakers, but not from the current sequence. And current sequence only means they are taking all of the negative samples from the same speaker and from the current sequence only.
Mahfuz,
Yeah.
why did the accuracy go up as it predicted more steps? That seems counterintuitive.
Okay. They have assumed that we should not make the problem too easy or too hard. That means if they predict just 2 steps, 4 steps, then the problem of prediction might be so easy. And if they would try to predict 20 steps or 18 steps or 22 steps, then the problem would be very hard. So for having a good representation, we have to be in the middle. We have to have some trade-off. We don't need to make it too hard or too easy.
Kind of, but if it's too easy, shouldn't the accuracy be closer to 100%?
Actually not.
No, remember the goal here is to build a representation
Yes,
which when
right,
used in the
right.
downstream task of classification should give a better accuracy. So by only using 2 time steps in the future for your representation. So if you look at the left-hand table now,
Yes.
so let's say you use those 2 steps, the representation in the CPC, you get an accuracy of 28.5. That's how you should read these tables.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for the purpose of building a good representation, 12 time steps should be a good length of your future to be able to build a good representation. That's the point here.
Okay.
So are you basically saying that you have a smaller representation of like your language when you have 2 time steps or something like that?
Very small representation, exactly.
Okay.
Actually, you are just basic. If you use 2 steps, that means you are trying to just relate the current context with just 2 future steps. So it may not capture enough shared information about the context, about the signal. So if you capture more relevant information of your signal, then your representation will be better and your classification accuracy for downstream tasks will be increased.
Yep.
That's the idea. So look at here, just during pre-training, you can consider this as pre-training, and you can consider these as downstream tasks.
Yep.
So for pre-training, if you just use 2 steps, then you may think that your representation will not be good enough. So,
well, I would say that that's also depending on the data that you're working with.
yeah, you're
Well,
right.
of course, this is specific to the data set here,
Yeah.
which is library speech.
Mhm. And also we can note here that during pre-training, if they predicted 16 steps ahead, then the accuracy for downstream again starts to drop, right? That means the pre-training problem should not be so hard and it should not be so easy. It is domain specific, right?
Yep.
Okay. So for the image problem, for the vision problem, they have taken 256 by 256 image and then converted that image into 7 by 7 grid, and each of the cell in the grid is actually 64 by 64 image patch.
Mhm.
Like this, actually, like this.
Yep.
So, and for each of the image pairs, they have got a representation, and they have, for encoding this image patch, they have used resonate for representing this image patch. And using resonate, they have represented this image patch as 1024 dimensional vector. Here. Okay. So the result will be actually 7 by 7 and 1024 tensor for each image, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, because there are 7 by 7 patches, and you have
Right.
mean pooling them 1024. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Predict up to 5 rows. Okay.
And so we are getting here 7 by 7 times 1024 dimensional tensor, and using the context, it is trying to predict the following 5 rows from the top. That means based on this context, it will try to predict the following rows from top to bottom. So this is our first time step. This is second time step. I'm saying about future time step. First future time step, second future time step, third future time step, and so on. And for autoregressive unit, they didn't use here GRURNN. Instead, they use PIGGEL CNN style autoregressive model. And they have tried to show top 1 accuracy on ImageNet datasets and top 5 accuracy on ImageNet datasets. And they try to compare with other state-of-the-art approaches. And they have shown that for top 1 accuracy, CPC can give us 48.7% accuracy on ImageNet level classification. So this is the idea of CPC. Any question?
But they didn't do a top 1 accuracy for the AlexNet?
No, they didn't report that.
That's weird. Did they say anything in the paper about whether was it performing poorly?
So they have shown that this is not performing very well, but it is performing good, at least as good as other state-of-the-art approaches.
Sure. Yep, this is good. This is pretty detailed. Can you just go back to those equations there, if you don't mind.
Which one?
The equations.
Okay.
I'm not interested in the results, but just the
Mhm.
equations actually.
Mhm. Which one?
This is
Yeah.
yeah, this one.
Mhm.
Interesting. Last point two. Can you talk about the equation two? Why is the function proportional to that? I don't remember reading this one actually, but can you talk about the second one? Why is that the case? Why is it proportional to that? Why is this function?
So they actually try to relate CT and XT plus K, right?
The context
We are
with the
actually
future.
trying to relate CT and XT plus K. That means which sample is actually related to this context,
Right.
right? And what is PXT plus K? PXT plus K means the sample that may come as the future sample, as an example of future sample. And you know, there will be only one sample correct and others will be negative samples, right?
That's true.
So P of xt plus k means all of the proposal distribution. That means it means the proposal distribution, including positive samples and negative samples.
Negative samples.
And it means the positive sample.
Given the context. Right.
Yeah. It means the positive samples. That means the sample which is related to this context.
Yep.
Yeah. So they are trying to maximize these two
That's
probabilities,
true.
these ratio.
Right.
So they are referring to this ratio as density ratio.
They're referring to that as a density ratio. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And they're trying to maximize it, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, this makes sense. That's fine. Thanks so much.
Anything else?
And for the others, do you have any questions about this work from an applied standpoint or from a mathematical standpoint?
Second.
No, I'm saying for the others, if they have any questions, feel free to bring them up.
What do y'all plan? What do y'all plan to do predictions with? Like, is this for images, or are we going to do it on like time series or what?
Sequences.
So time series.
Ideally sequences from how I understand this one. But
Okay.
they also show an example using images as well. But to me, this is more like, beneficial for sequences. Yeah, sorry, Mahfuz, go ahead. This is your stage. Go ahead, answer your
No problem. No, it is not my stage. It is our stage, right?
Sequences, ideally. But essentially, this is all about representation learning. Given we have a sequence of data, speech. This is something I realized. All these kind of techniques are more, bent towards understanding representations and sequences where you have people speaking and you have audio, music, or whatever. You have this high frequency data, right? And MFCC traditionally used is not really a good representation. So they're trying to use this notion of negative sampling to find better representations. Just a slightly different view of building those representations.
Okay.
For someone into signal processing or electrical engineering, they would understand this. Also, that null frequency Cepstol coefficients, they are used as representations of our audio signals. So this is an alternative view of that one, building a representation using deep learning approaches.
Yeah, my ears always kind of perk up on time series or sequence prediction.
Yeah,
because my master's thesis was epilepsy prediction from EEG.
I see.
But I didn't really have a strong group of machine learning experts around me, so I was kind of going it alone, and I use support vector machines.
Well, you're at the right place now.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is it, I guess. But thanks so much, Mahfuz.
Okay, thank you, Harsh.
Unless anything else.
Any other question? Like this one. Actually, they are all related. They are very close in meaning.
Yeah, it's easy to see that. Once they get a good intuition of, I don't know, did Sergey spoke about negative sampling the last time, right? A couple of weeks ago. Probably, maybe you guys should watch that video and come back to this one. Just understand what negative sampling is, and this becomes really easy. And try to understand what this mixed speaker, within speaker, and all these are. Think of you guys, let's say you have a sequence, right?
Yeah.
The positive sample is, let's say you have a window of interest. Your positive sample comes from that window of interest, and your negative samples come from anything other than that window of interest. That's how we build these positive and negative samples.
Yeah, you can do that. That is called same speaker.
That's the same speaker. And then if you have multiple
Maybe,
speakers, you bring your negative samples from others.
maybe you are meaning current sequence only.
I'm using that current sequence context to explain what same, mixed, and all these are. Just understand that there is a window. You generate your positive sample from that window. Now, with that said, if your negative sample comes from outside the window within the same speaker, that's the second from bottom. If your negative samples come from other speakers, that's the third one from the bottom, something like that. So this is just all data building mechanism, nothing else.
Yeah, right.
We just have to understand what negative sampling is, and then info in CE just becomes really easy.
Negative samples means not the right sample.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like positive sample and negative samples, right? Yeah. So traditionally, let's go back a step. Traditionally, we have a bunch of data where we know the positive samples and the negative samples. But what can you do in the absence of any such samples, right? More or less, like if Alex is around, he can help me with this one. Is this called self-supervised? You're relying on the data you have with no label information to build your
unsupervised representation.
Unsupervised, right?
Or self-supervised.
Self-supervised, exactly. That's the word sometimes. I mean, both of them can be used interchangeably sometimes. So you're relying on your data to build your labels. That's what's happening here. But yeah, with that, I'll stop here.
But we are formulating our model in the way that they will find their relationships between them automatically.
Yes.
Yeah.
The underlying goals can differ, but the first step is understanding what negative sampling is, and after that, how do we use this negative sample to build representations or something else. So in this particular work, it's a combination of negative sampling and representation learning using this notion of mutual information, nothing else.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks so much, Mahfuz, again. That was helpful. And don't forget to upload your slides so we can take a look at it later.
I will. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Mahfuz.
Maybe we can close.
Thanks, Mahfuz.
Right? If you don't have any question.
Thank you.
I'm sure Sergey will get back to you guys about the topic for next week.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much, guys. I'll get going then.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye, Harsh. Yep, have a good one.